Crashes like this are what many of us think of when we hear the name Insurance Institute for Highway Safety. The nonprofit, funded by automotive insurance companies, wrecks vehicles at a facility near Charlottesville to learn how drivers might be impacted by a variety of accidents.
The research we do here has a direct impact on safety on the roads today.
Their research isn't just limited to crash tests. Some of their work involves helping drivers avoid crashes altogether.
Over the last few years, we've seen a lot more of the systems that help prevent drivers from getting in crashes in the first place.
David Ayler is manager of the IIHS Active Safety Testing Program, which researches features on new cars that are designed to prevent collisions. In the last 10 years, many automakers have introduced technology that can see objects in front of or behind a car and automatically stop the vehicle. I tried out the features on the Insurance Institute's test track. As we drove toward an object at a low speed, our vehicle applied the brakes seconds before impact. Other safety features are designed to keep drivers from veering into other moving vehicles or leaving the road. Technology like this lane assist feature on the Tesla Model S can read markings on the pavement and partially steer the car to prevent drivers from leaving their intended path.
Now, this is designed to assist the driver. This is not technology that's supposed to be used to drive the car itself.
Absolutely. So this will, follow other vehicles, and it will maintain your position in the lane, but it's not a replacement for an actual driver.
Some lane assist technology will apply the car's brakes if the driver starts to drift. Features like this are common right now on high-end luxury cars.
So this is about a $100,000 car. This is not something most of us could afford. Is this technology available on cars that are more affordable?
Yeah, so we're starting to see lane assist technology on more mainstream models.
Many vehicles can set off an alarm when the car veers out of its lane, but it's up to the driver to steer back into place. Ayler says features like automatic braking to prevent front-end crashes will become common on a wide selection of vehicles within the next 5 years.
There's a voluntary commitment by most of the manufacturers that it will be standard by 2022.
Also becoming widely available are these lights, appearing in rear-view mirrors to alert drivers when a vehicle is in their blind spot.
They help you detect if there's a vehicle in your blind spot and will warn you if you try to change the lane.
Adaptive cruise control features use sensors to maintain speed and automatically slow down when necessary to keep cars a safe distance away from other vehicles. Dynamic headlights can pivot as drivers navigate winding roads. And many cars now come equipped with backup cameras and sensors that alert drivers to surrounding objects and, in some cases, stop the car to avoid a collision.
We're seeing more of these systems available on cars.
That's thanks, at least in part, to the testing that happens at the IIHS. Automakers value the ratings assigned by the agency and want to receive high marks for their safety features.
Because we rate them and we evaluate them, we started to see them becoming optional on more vehicles.
Since the introduction of crash avoidance technology, researchers at the IIHS say they've noticed a decline in certain types of fender benders.
When we look at police-reported crashes, we're seeing about a reduction of 50% in front-to-rear crashes,
creating safer conditions on the road. And for the Insurance Institute's researchers, they hope it will lead to fewer crashes like the ones they so often evaluate. In Greene County, Tim Saunders, WDBJ 7. Look closely at the traffic in Crozet, Virginia, near Charlottesville, and you might notice drivers are sharing the road with a vehicle that doesn't actually have a driver, at least not a human driver. Ralph Groves is behind the steering wheel, but his hands aren't touching it.
We're approaching the stop now.
He's a safety engineer, monitoring a driverless vehicle called Tony.
Tony is a fully autonomous, self-driving shuttle.
Tony is an acronym that stands for To Navigate You. The vehicle was built by Perrone Robotics, a Virginia-based company that develops automated transportation technology.
Driverless vehicles is the inevitable wave of the future. It's happening, and it's happening fast.
Perrone has programmed Tony to operate on short, designated routes. Mapping software tells Tony where to go. Cameras, radar, and 3D scanning LiDAR sensors measure distance and help the vehicle avoid colliding with other objects.
In many ways, the vehicle is more responsive than a human being. It's not checking its cell phone for text messages. It's just focused on driving.
Self-driving cars are being tested all over the country right now, but Tony is the first to operate on public roads while offering rides to the public. Since July, Perrone has partnered with Albemarle County and a regional transportation system called Jaunt to offer Virginia's first automated shuttle service.
Neighborhood electric vehicles can kind of crawl into areas where traditional transit is not operating today.
Tony carries passengers from Crozet's downtown area to residential parks and neighborhoods. The electric vehicle is small, with room for only about 6 people, including Groves, who monitors the rides and can take over to drive when necessary. Tony moves slowly, traveling around 25 miles an hour.
I was impressed with how smooth it was.
Victor Cruz took advantage of the Tony service on a recent morning. While initially nervous about riding in a vehicle with no driver, Cruz said he quickly learned to trust the technology.
I felt relaxed, and it felt like everything was working the way it was designed to work.
Would you have been maybe more nervous if there hadn't been an actual person behind the wheel ready to take over?
No doubt.
During a test run with us, Groves had to take command when a mail truck tried to pull out in front of Tony. The shuttle is programmed to stop when other vehicles enter its path.
We've actually built our technology for the most complex scenario.
Perrone says after its pilot in Virginia, the company hopes to sell its automated vehicles for commercial uses, such as airport and hotel shuttles.
There's amusement parks and other types of environments where it's a long distance from a parking lot or where you are to where you want to go.
Perrone has been showing off its vehicle to potential clients and says other communities have been interested in adopting the driverless technology as a form of public transportation.
I think you're going to see autonomous vehicles in these kinds of environments sooner rather than later.
Which means your future ride through a parking lot or crowded downtown area may be one without a driver. On your side in Albemarle County, Tim Saunders, NBC 12. It's a common but unpredictable problem along Interstate 81. Traffic crashes often block the highway and leave traffic backed up for miles. This crash near Natural Bridge in June of 2017 was relatively minor. No one was seriously injured, but the incident caused an 8-mile backup and shut down the northbound side of the highway for more than 5 hours.
Interstate 81 is a real challenge for anybody who lives along the corridor.
Data collected from the Virginia Department of Transportation shows about 2,000 crashes happen along Interstate 81 every year. Around 45 of those incidents take at least 4 hours to clear. That's a significant loss of time for trucking businesses like Lawrence Companies based in Roanoke County.
We have about 250 trucks, and Interstate 81 is our lifeblood.
More than 1/3 of all trucks traveling in or through Virginia use Interstate 81. That's around 11 million trucks carrying $312 billion worth of goods. When the highway is shut down, even for just a few hours, business owners and truckers say they lose money.
Most drivers are compensated based on the miles they travel. So for the driver themselves, they're not making any money while they're sitting in traffic.
Unlike Interstates 95, 64, and 66, which back up in urban areas during predictable rush hours, more than half of all the delays on Interstate 81 are caused by unpredictable incidents, ranging from crashes to weather and work zones.
Those of us in the legislature representing the 81 corridor have agreed on one thing, that it needs to be fixed.
In 2018, Virginia's transportation officials developed the Interstate 81 Corridor Improvement Plan, a report that details problems along the highway and solutions that could cost around $4 billion. The report was released in December after a year of study. Lawmakers took immediate action. In January, legislation was introduced that would have paid for improvements to 81 by tolling drivers. The proposed rates were 11 cents a mile for cars and 17 cents a mile for trucks.
The vast majority of the cost would be picked up by the trucking industry. And that's problematic because it's not just trucks on the road.
Trucking industry leaders like Pierre Segelke came out strongly against the tolling proposal, prompting a change in Richmond.
We are going back to the drawing board, trying to come up with some solutions that meet some of the objections.
Delegate Steve Landis from Harrisonburg was a patron of the original toll legislation, but after getting pushback, he changed course.
The good news is the General Assembly, both the House and Senate, have agreed that we need to move forward on making improvements to Interstate 81.
Landis introduced a bill which passed in the House of Delegates and is now awaiting approval in the state Senate. It calls for the formation of a committee made up of lawmakers and transportation officials along the Interstate 81 corridor, along with local planners. They would study what drivers and other stakeholders will tolerate when it comes to paying for work on 81.
It has to be something that gets through the General Assembly, and it has to be something the public buys into.
The problem, Landis says, is that the options for funding 81's needed improvements are limited. Tolling was thought to be the best way of putting the cost of paying for 81's improvements on people who actually use the interstate. Landis says funding could come from an increase in state gas and sales taxes, but he doesn't favor that option alone.
It's putting more of the burden on those of us that live in the corridor, less of a burden on those people that are traveling through the corridor.
Organizations opposed to tolling, like the Alliance for Toll-Free Interstates, say that option carries a lot of what they call unintended consequences.
The reality is that people don't like tolls and they drive around them. And so what you see is traffic diversion onto secondary roads.
Stephanie Kane says highways like Route 11, 29, and 460 would see a sharp increase in traffic, especially from trucks, if tolls were applied to 81.
They're talking about tolling a road that people currently access without having to pay any tolls, and there is no doubt that that will change driver behavior.
Kane says toll roads are not an efficient way of raising money. She points to the Triangle Expressway, an 18-mile highway near Raleigh, North Carolina. Even though tolling on that highway is completely electronic, with no human toll collectors, Kane says 36% of every dollar collected last year went to overhead costs that cover the toll road's operation.
Toll operators are in the business of making money by running a road.
Ultimately, Landis says tolling in some form may be necessary to address 81's needs.
I've said from the get-go that I'm open to any and all sources.
He hopes the committee that could be formed by his legislation will find a consensus on funding based on public input.
Hopefully the public will buy in and the legislators will buy into an option of either tolling or a gas tax or some other kind of fees.
It's been a long road. We're not at the end of the road.
State Senator Mark Obenshain, who crafted the legislation that led to the 81 Corridor Improvement Plan, hopes momentum built up over the last 2 years to address the interstate's problems will continue.
We're going to make it a priority, and it's my hope that we're going to be able to come up with a plan sooner the better.
Keeping 81 on a clear path. Tim Saunders, WDBJ 7.
As people in the town of Bedford continue fighting for a passenger train station, we're hearing candid comments from 2 state employees who have influence over whether the project will get funding. Their statements prompted a human resources investigation at the state agency that oversees Virginia rail projects. It all started with a voicemail left for WDBJ 7's Tim Saunders. So Tim, why were those state employees calling you?
We were working on a story related to the proposed Bedford station, Jane. The employees were trying to leave a short message asking me to call them back, but they forgot to hang up the phone. What followed was more than 2 minutes of candid and at times explicit remarks about the Bedford proposal and a number of statewide leaders.
The voicemail was left on April 15th by Michael McLaughlin, a man who manages rail initiatives for the Virginia Department of Rail and Public Transportation. He was joined by Chris Smith, the agency's Director of Policy, Communications, and Legislative Affairs. Virginia law doesn't allow us to broadcast the voicemail because the men didn't realize they were being recorded. We can tell you what was said. The pair left a 25-second message asking WDBJ 7 to call them back before attempting to hang up the phone. Instead of hanging up, they began talking about the Long Bridge, a span that crosses the Potomac River. It's the only bridge that carries freight and passenger trains between Virginia and Washington, D.C., and state leaders say it's in desperate need of an upgrade to accommodate the growing amount of rail traffic along the East Coast. Work to address the Long Bridge is estimated to cost more than $1 billion, significantly more than the $10 million requested to build the Bedford station. a platform that would allow Amtrak riders to stop between Roanoke and Lynchburg. Advocates say the Bedford project would have a significant economic impact by bringing more tourists and business people to our region while boosting ridership for our local Amtrak service. In the voicemail, McLaughlin can be heard saying, "If we have to pay for Bedford Station instead of Longbridge, then we're expletive, because do you know how many other things we're going to have to pay for around the state?" Smith responds saying, "We're expletive on a bigger scale with Norfolk Southern." McLaughlin replies, "I thought Norfolk Southern doesn't even want it," followed by Smith, who says, "That's what I don't understand about Shannon's budget. There are so many bigger things at play with Norfolk Southern right now. Why would you want to expletive them off?" The Shannon he's talking about is Shannon Valentine, Virginia's Secretary of Transportation. During her time as a delegate in the General Assembly, she played a leading role in bringing the Northeast Regional Amtrak service to our region. In a statement, Valentine told WDBJ-7, "I remain passionate about passenger rail service. Across all transportation agencies, I'm committed to excellence and expect that transportation recommendations and decisions are based on evidence, policies, and procedures, and reflect our responsibility to the citizens we serve. Anything less is unacceptable." The voicemail continued, with McLaughlin bringing up Virginia's former Secretary of Transportation, Aubrey Lane. Still talking about the Bedford proposal, McLaughlin says, "This is where Aubrey would be like expletive kill it." Later in the message, Smith said of the Bedford station, "If the Democrats are in the majority in the fall, we play them off of Roanoke's delegation, John Edwards, Sam Rasool. They'll shut it down." Smith was talking about State Senator John Edwards and Delegate Sam Rasool. We played the recording for both men, who said they aren't concerned about employees of a state agency trying to influence them politically.
I've always supported Amtrak stopping in Bedford. It'd be good for ridership for Amtrak. It'd be good for Bedford. It'd be good for tourism.
I'm fully committed to increasing passenger rail all across that line, including Bedford, Roanoke, on into Blacksburg and beyond.
Before WDBJ-7 approached anyone about the recording, we contacted McLaughlin and Smith in an email that copied their supervisor, Jennifer Mitchell, the director of Virginia's Department of Rail and Public Transportation. McLaughlin and Smith did not respond. Instead, we received a phone call from Mitchell, who later invited us to Richmond so that she and her agency's human resources manager could listen to the recording.
It absolutely does not reflect the way that we at DRPT do business.
Mitchell said the recording was handled as a personnel matter, but was not able to comment on whether any action was taken against McLaughlin or Smith.
We hold our staff to very high standards, and in my experience, all of our staff are very professional. They operate with integrity and transparency to the public that we serve.
Now, we first met with Mitchell about this recording 2 weeks ago. Since then, she's reached out to the people mentioned in the recording. She also drove to Bedford last week for a face-to-face meeting with the leaders advocating for the train station. Jane, the people in Bedford say there's been a very positive outcome. We will tell you what that is and how the agency is working to give the Bedford station a closer look. That's coming up in part 2 of our story tonight on WDBJ-7 at 6.
The state agency that oversees rail projects in Virginia is defending its work to evaluate a proposed train station in Bedford. At 5:30, we told you about a voicemail message left for WDBJ-7 that included some candid comments about the Bedford proposal. New at 6, WDBJ-7's Tim Saunders shows us what we've learned since the recording surfaced.
In a message accidentally left on the voicemail of a WDBJ-7 phone, Michael McLaughlin, a man who manages rail initiatives for the Virginia Department of Rail and Public Transportation, can be heard talking for more than 2 minutes with his coworker, Chris Smith. They used explicit terms to talk about a handful of state leaders and the proposal to build a passenger train station in Bedford. At one point, McLaughlin said, "If we have to pay for Bedford Station instead of Longbridge, then we're expletive. Because do you know how many other things we're going to have to pay for around the state?" The Long Bridge is a railroad bridge across the Potomac River that needs more than $1 billion worth of upgrades. Jennifer Mitchell is director of the DRPT and supervises the men heard in the voicemail.
It absolutely does not reflect the way that we at DRPT do business.
As a follow-up to the recording, WDBJ7 wanted to know if the comments made by McLaughlin and Smith reflected how the agency pursues rail initiatives. At one point in the recording, the men can be heard talking about several state lawmakers.
We have a very good relationship with the General Assembly and with other elected officials across the state, and we certainly respect the role that they play in representing their constituents.
Mitchell said her agency has given serious consideration to the idea of building a train station in Bedford. She gave WDBJ7 a timeline, detailing her department's efforts to research the Bedford proposal over a 6-year period.
We have to look at all of the needs statewide and balance the cost of any project against those statewide needs.
The biggest need, according to Mitchell, is the Long Bridge. Funding that project will take priority for several years. For that reason, Mitchell said her agency will not recommend funding this year for Bedford's $10 million request to build a train station, but discussions will continue.
Last Wednesday, Mitchell traveled here to Bedford to meet face-to-face with leaders who've been working on the train station proposal. That meeting was scheduled before the voicemail came to light.
During their meeting, Mitchell told Bedford leaders that her staff will recommend funding for a planning study to evaluate the potential cost and impacts of a Bedford station. They're also looking into the possibility of restoring a bus service that would shuttle Amtrak customers from Bedford to the train station in Lynchburg. The moves, according to Mitchell, are designed to keep the Bedford proposal on track for future funding. Tim Saunders, WDBJ 7.
After WDBJ7 contacted the Department of Rail and Public Transportation about that voicemail, agency leaders launched an internal investigation. Mitchell said the matter was handled by Human Resources, but she was not able to say whether any action was taken against the men who left the message.
Travel Route 29 between Danville and Greensboro, and you might notice signs along the highway that read Future Interstate 785. They've been there, off and on, for more than 20 years. Leaders announced the interstate designation in 1998.
Our economic professionals now have a better opportunity to market our communities.
Even today, Pennsylvania County's Economic Development Director Matt Rose says 785 could transform Southern Virginia.
It's a game changer, really.
So why, more than 2 decades after it was first announced, is 785 still a future interstate? While the highway doesn't exist in our region yet, work is happening in North Carolina to bring 785 closer to the Commonwealth.
This project is somewhat committed.
When completed, Interstate 785 will run about 50 miles from Interstate 85 in Greensboro to U.S. routes 58 and 360 in Danville. 7 miles of the highway have already been completed. The most recent segment opened in 2017, connecting with Route 29 just north of Greensboro. Last week, the North Carolina Department of Transportation allocated $247 million to fund an additional 16 miles of construction.
Right now, we've got it scheduled in our state transportation improvement program.
Mike Mills, a division engineer for the North Carolina Department of Transportation, says the state will acquire property for the project in 2024, with construction tentatively scheduled to start in 2027. When the new segment is finished, Interstate 785 will come within 15 miles of the Virginia border. Mills says the remaining portion of the highway between Reedsville and Danville will require less work.
All in all, that section is probably the easier part to construct.
Mills says 785 north of Greensboro will essentially be an upgrade of the existing Route 29. Contractors will have to widen shoulders, increase the height of some bridges, and cut off access to some private homes and businesses.
The finished interstate won't be a dramatic change from what drivers see today. The biggest difference will come in how the road appears to the outside world. Rose says having a red, white, and blue interstate shield on the map will make Southside more competitive when trying to attract new employers.
It is very important to certain businesses.
Rowe is in the process of trying to recruit a large manufacturer to build a facility at the Southern Virginia megasite at Berry Hill. Many of the companies Rowe hopes to speak with are using site selectors to scout out potential locations.
One of the boxes that site selectors are looking to check off, frankly, is are you on an identified federal interstate?
Rowe says he talks to employers every month who mark Pennsylvania County off their short list because of the area's distance to an interstate.
A lot of times you won't even get a call, you won't even know that you were in the game until afterwards when somebody will say, well, because you weren't on a federal interstate, we did not select you to go as far as to the short list.
That's because of a perceived lack of connectivity. Michael Craig, an assistant professor of economics at the University of Lynchburg, says companies want direct access to major highways, airports, and rail lines.
So an interstate's probably going to be a good signal that, Danville is connected to broader infrastructure networks.
Craig says Southside already has good connectivity and other assets like colleges and the low cost of living companies are looking for. But having an interstate shield on the map could give the area an advantage over other communities.
This whole total package that they can offer, where the interstate is just sort of the final piece of the puzzle, that could make a difference for sure.
That's why Roe and other Southside leaders are eager to see 785 completed. If North Carolina's work stays on schedule, the highway could be signed to the Virginia border in the next 10 years.
I think it's a tremendous gesture from our partners in North Carolina that they're making these improvements to get Danville and Pennsylvania County and Southern Virginia connected.
In the Commonwealth, VDOT says upgrades at the Elizabeth Street intersection and a few other spot improvements will be needed along Route 29. But aside from those changes, the corridor already meets the standards necessary to carry the 785 designation, possibly giving Southside its first interstate by the end of the next decade. In Danville, Tim Saunders, WDBJ 7.